The expansion of the HPV, human papillomavirus, vaccine's target population over the last 2 decades is a striking example of how a fundamentally beneficial medical product can be entangled in aggressive marketing, policy lobbying, and commercial overreach. Initially developed to prevent cervical cancer by targeting high-risk HPV strains, the vaccine represented a major scientific breakthrough in cancer prevention. But as Merck's Gardasil gained FDA approval and global acceptance, its indications broadened, first to boys, then to older adults well beyond the ages of initial HPV exposure. At each stage, public messaging emphasized necessity and urgency, while dissenting voices who questioned the benefit-to-risk ratio for low-risk groups were often sidelined. The result was not a rejection of science, but a distortion of proportion, where risk communication, long-term data gaps, and commercial motivations converged to transform a cancer-preventing vaccine into a billion-dollar enterprise that, in some contexts, may have overshot its appropriate use. When Gardasil was approved by the FDA in 2006, it was hailed as a revolutionary vaccine to protect young women against the strains of HPV most commonly linked to cervical cancer, namely type 16 and 18, which account for about 70% of cases. It also covered types 6 and 11, which cause genital warts. Vaccinating girls before sexual debut made scientific sense. HPV is sexually transmitted, and early inoculation offered a preventive shield before potential exposure. Public health authorities embraced the vaccine, recommending routine administration to girls around ages 11 to 12, and in some cases, as young as 9. The scientific consensus was clear. This was a major advance in women's health. But Merck, the vaccine's manufacturer, didn't stop there. In the following years, Gardasil's approved usage expanded rapidly, to boys, then to men and women up to age 26, and eventually up to age 45. These broader indications were based not on new epidemic data, but on modeling studies, immunogenicity trials, and public health lobbying that suggested potential, though diminishing, benefits for older individuals and males. Meanwhile, promotional campaigns ramped up, appealing not only to fear of cancer, but also to notions of social responsibility and sexual protection. Messaging increasingly implied that those who opted out were taking an unnecessary health risk or endangering others. Yet as the vaccine's reach expanded, so did the questions. For instance, the majority of adults acquire HPV shortly after becoming sexually active, and most infections clear naturally without ever causing disease. By the time a person reaches their late 20s or 30s, the likelihood that vaccination would offer meaningful protection drops significantly, especially if they've already been exposed to one or more of the HPV strains in the vaccine. In those cases, the marginal benefit may be minimal, even negligible. Critics, including some public health scholars and clinicians, argued that the cost-benefit calculus was being overstated for these groups, especially given the lack of long-term clinical endpoint data, such as reductions in cancer incidence. For the broader population, the scientific debate became especially politicized in the US and some other countries, where concerns about safety, autonomy, and mandates collided with public health campaigns and industry-backed efforts to normalize universal vaccination. While the HPV vaccine has a strong safety record overall, its rollout was not without controversy. Reports of side effects, though mostly rare and proven to be causally linked, generated media attention. In some cases, countries like Japan suspended proactive recommendation of the vaccine pending further review, not due to proven harms but due to concerns about insufficient long-term safety data and public mistrust. Meanwhile, Merck's profits surged. Gardasil quickly became one of the top-selling vaccines globally, generating billions in revenue. The newer version, Gardasil 9, expanded protection to 5 additional cancer-causing HPV types and was aggressively marketed as the gold standard. Its expanded use in males and older adults helped Merck tap into entirely new markets, ensuring long-term revenue streams as public health authorities adjusted immunization schedules and recommendations. In many cases, these decisions were based on models and projected benefits rather than real-world evidence of cancer reduction in these new populations. The issue is not that the HPV vaccine lacks value. It clearly does, particularly for young people vaccinated before sexual debut. But the ethical concern arises when pharmaceutical companies, aided by regulatory inertia and enthusiastic marketing, continue to expand indications into populations where the benefit becomes speculative, incremental, or uncertain. Vaccine expansion in this way risks diminishing public trust, not because the science is false, but because the boundaries between medical need and market opportunity are blurred. It's also worth noting the opportunity costs. Resources devoted to broad HPV vaccination in low-risk adult populations could arguably have been better spent improving access among high-risk, underserved youth, especially in developing countries where cervical cancer remains a major cause of mortality. Instead, efforts were often concentrated in high-income nations, where public health infrastructure and screening programs already reduced cervical cancer incidence significantly, and where adult vaccination brought diminishing returns. In the final analysis, the expansion of HPV vaccine indications is a lesson in how medical products, even those based on sound science, can become vehicles for corporate ambition when profit incentives are tied to regulatory approval rather than public health outcomes. Merck didn't invent the need for the vaccine, but it expertly maximized its marketable scope. And while many benefited, others were drawn into a treatment regime they may not have needed at a public and private cost that was rarely scrutinized. The real damage wasn't harm in the clinical sense. It was the erosion of precision in public health, the quiet redefinition of medical necessity, and the commercialization of prevention under the banner of universal protection.